Next, we're going to welcome Senator Foreman up to tell us about RS 31839. Welcome, Senator. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. I am Dan Foreman, Senator District 6, and if my voice holds out, I will get through these RSs. This is RS 31839. This proposed legislation repeals Section 18-3309 Idaho Code and replaces it with a new 18-3309 that prohibits limitations regarding concealed weapons at public colleges and universities. This legislation will have no significant impact on the general fund. This proposed legislation will revoke the authority of the Board of Regents of the University of Idaho, the Board of Trustees of the state colleges and universities, the Board for Career Technical Education, and the Boards of Trustees of each of the community colleges established under Chapter 21, Title 3, to regulate or prohibit the otherwise lawful possession, carrying, or transportation of firearms or ammunition by any person possessing a concealed weapon with a permit issued under applicable Idaho code. Many of my constituents have requested this change to code as they feel the current code violates the Second Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and Idaho's Constitution. The current code also makes exceptions allowing the carrying of weapons for a person or employee authorized by the applicable university or college. Quite simply, the constitutional right of being able to keep and bear arms is not a privilege, namely something that can be turned on or off by a governing body. It is a constitutional right. Many would assert it is therefore a God-given right. And consequently, my constituents feel the management at the colleges and universities should not be allowed to pick and choose who will be allowed to exercise a constitutional right. My constituents feel our colleges and universities should, although allowed by current code, not be restricting in part their ability to carry concealed, having qualified for a lawfully obtained permit that allows concealed carry in most locations, even city, county, and state offices. So I ask for your favorable vote on RS 31839 and be glad to take questions.
Committee questions, Senator Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you this morning, Chairman Foreman. I know this is a print hearing, so I just have one quick question. How does this relate to arenas or big football arenas where there's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people that are on these university areas?
Senator Foreman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Burnt, a good question. Basically, it would remove the restrictions from those areas. Currently, I've looked at some of the restrictions. For example, at U of I, they have it limited to buildings that can only contain X number of people. Has to be under that amount. It can't be in dormitories or areas like that. And when I used to patrol the campus as a law enforcement officer, many times students approached and said, I enjoy the shooting sports. I brought a firearm with me to school, but I have to lock it up in the police armory, and then we have to have an officer go unlock it and give it to them and then put it back in when they're done. They say, why can't I keep it in my vehicle on campus or in my dorm room? Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't understand why people's Second Amendment rights go away to a degree just when they step on campus. Now, there are concerns. Some people say, well, this could lead to trouble. Well, I patrolled that campus for many, many, many years. We didn't have those problems. We have to have a little faith in our Idaho citizens. They're college students. They're just as intelligent and law-abiding as anyone else. And quite frankly, many people on campus are carrying already for their own, safety and protection, which I don't advocate if it's against the law, but, there is a need for it.
Other questions? Don't say any. Committee, what's your wishes on RS 31839? Senator Shippey.
Mr. Chairman, for a motion.
Motion's in order.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we send RS 31874 to print.
I believe the number is 39.
Excuse me, I must be looking at the wrong one. I am looking at the wrong one, excuse me. Let me restate that motion, Mr. Chair. I move that we send RS 31839 to print.
Motion by Senator Shippey, second by Senator Harris, that RS 31839 be sent to print. Discussion on the motion. Don't see any. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. You're up again, Senator Foreman, with RS 31840.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This proposed legislation repeals Section 46-802 of Code. This section of Code became law way back in 1927. The only impact on the general fund would be the cost to disseminate and change the code. Idaho Code 46-802 prohibits a body of men from associating together as a militia or as a military company or organization. The code calls this type of association prohibited unorganized association. It also prohibits a body of men from parading with firearms in any city or town in the state of Idaho. The code also requires the permission of the governor for military science students, otherwise known as ROTC cadets, to parade or drill with firearms. Idaho Code 46-802 should be repealed because it directly violates the First and Second Amendment rights of the citizens of Idaho as found in the Bill of Rights. The code also violates Article 1, Sections 9, 10, and 11 of the Constitution of the State of Idaho with respect to freedom of speech, the right of assembly, and the right to keep and bear arms. This proposed legislation does not take a stance on the issue of militias per se, although the militia concept dates back to the days of George Washington, who was a strong proponent of militias. And many do not realize that all able-bodied citizens in the state of Idaho between the ages of 18 and 45 are members of the Idaho Unorganized Militia. The militia concept of volunteer service is still alive today in the form of community watch groups and citizen augmentees to aid law enforcement in times of crisis. I ask your support in repealing this ancient Idaho Code 46-802.
Thank you, Senator Foreman. Questions? Senator Adams?
Mr. Chairman, for a motion.
Motion's in order.
Mr. Chairman, there we go. I move that we send RS 31840 to print.
Motion by Senator Adams, second by Senator Shippey, that RS 31840 be introduced. Discussion on the motion. Don't see any. Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Don't run away. RS 31874, Senator Foreman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Introduce yourself again. So,
I'm Dan Foreman, Senator District 6. This RS represents proposed legislation that will create Chapter 73, Title 39 Idaho Code. This Idaho Code will provide the World Health Organization shall have no jurisdiction in the state of Idaho. This legislation will have no appreciable impact on the general fund. The WHO is a specialized agency of the UN responsible for global public health. The WHO has been heavily criticized for being very slow to respond to the COVID pandemic and for opposing international travel restrictions during the pandemic. Also, the organization was criticized for supporting the misinformation coming from the Chinese Communist government that denied the possibility of human-to-human COVID virus transmission. The WHO leadership actually praised the Chinese government's response to the COVID crisis and its commitment to transparency. WHO is currently working on completing a global pandemic agreement that would become an international legal agreement between its member nations. This agreement could take the form of a treaty, a regulation, or a resolution. A treaty would have binding requirements on the member nations, of which there are 196. A regulation would also be binding. A resolution would not be binding. There have been calls for the United States to withdraw its membership in the WHO. The U.S. currently pays more, surprise, surprise, than anybody else into the WHO. The 2025 WHO assessment for the U.S. will be $261 million. Proposed Chapter 73, Title 39 provides the WHO would have no jurisdiction or control over the state government of Idaho with respect to all matters associated with public health within the state. It would further provide the citizens of Idaho would not be subject to the terms, conditions, rules, or regulations promulgated by the WHO arising from any agreement, directive, initiative, or program instituted by agreement between the federal government and the WHO. Now, this proposed legislation does not address the subject of a treaty between the United States and the WHO, as that would be governed by the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And that's an area that we really shouldn't venture into, because the Supremacy Clause would basically say that we would be obligated to follow any treaty. In light of the WHO's misleading and ineffective performance during the pandemic and its apparent support for the Chinese Communist government's handling of the COVID situation, I believe it is in the best interest of the citizens of Idaho that the WHO have no jurisdiction or control over public health matters in Idaho. I feel it's important the state of Idaho is not subject to any mandatory rules of the WHO, and I ask for your affirmative vote on this RS.
Thank you, Senator Foreman. Senator Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Foreman, thank you again for this presentation. My only question that I have is, did you have an opportunity to consult the legality of this proposed legislation with the Attorney General's office of the state of Idaho?
Senator Foreman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Burt, no, I did not run it through the AG's office. I did get some feedback with respect to from the LSO with respect to the treaty situation. From my research and understanding, that would be the only constitutional rub or legal rub with what I'm proposing. But no, I did not get an opinion as of yet from our Attorney General.
Senator Byrne.
Follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So, Chairman Foreman, you feel like this proposed legislation would actually or legitimately free the state of Idaho from any type of undue or due influence from the WHO?
Senator Foreman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Byrne, I do. I think it's a requisite first step in the interest of states' rights. We're a sovereign state, and granted, under the principles of federalism and the way the Constitution is structured, federal law does reign supreme. But also, under the 10th Amendment, we have states' rights. And I think this is a good step, considering what's been going on with pandemics and the threat of new pandemics approaching our state and our nation, that this is a way to reassert our states' rights in a business-like or proper way, if you will. Again, giving deference to the treaty situation, not trying to buck that headwind here. But I think it's important for the state of Idaho to stand up for itself in light of what the WHO has done and failed to do recently.
Senator Byrne.
One more follow-up. I don't disagree with anything that you've just said, and we've had conversations about this off the record in our offices discussing this legislation. But I would be interested in some type of an opinion from the AG's office regarding this legislation, just so that we're not fighting again. And I know that we're getting here in less than a week, we're going to have a new administration running this country, and most of us, I believe, are very excited for that change. But I still would like to have an opinion just to make sure that we're not in the crosshairs of the federal government regarding this proposed legislation.
You're welcome to comment.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Burt, I'd be more than happy to run it through our outstanding Attorney General. And with respect to the new administration, my research indicates that there's a very good chance this could all become moot based on public statements. But I'd be happy to get that opinion before we went to committee or whatever.
Senator Shippey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Senator Foreman, thank you for being here this morning. My question is, can you give an example of where the World Health Organization policy is being implemented in Idaho, and then how that would practically be overturned as a result of this legislation?
Senator Foreman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Shippey, no, I can't give you a specific example. To the best of my knowledge, the WHO has been working mostly at the federal level. And again, there are 196 nations there. We do contribute more money than anybody else. So I'm sure that gives our federal government some say in what the WHO comes up with. But I see this as a preventative step. I can't stand here and tell you that the WHO has done anything directly to assert undue influence on the citizens of Idaho, but I want to make sure that they don't.
Senator Harris.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Harris.
for motion,
Motion is in order.
I would move to introduce RS 31874.
Motion by Senator Harris, second by Senator Anton, that RS 31874 be sent to print. Discussion on the motion. Don't see any. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. If you're up to it, we'll see if you can go 4 for 4, Senator. So RS 31877 is up.
I'm Dan Foreman, Senator, District 6, 31877. This RS requests the Legislative Council appoint a committee to investigate the Idaho state government's response to the COVID pandemic. It represents a request for a study to discover information that may be useful to the state planners in the future. The proposed Senate concurrent resolution does not, and this is an important point, does not seek to point fingers or impart blame on anyone. It simply represents a request for useful information to be employed if we must respond to a similar future crisis. Now, the legislature did take actions that were appropriate during the pandemic. However, there has been no comprehensive public after-action review conducted to study the collective actions of state government in response to the crisis. It seems prudent and actually a prerequisite to future preparedness that we learn from the past to be prepared to promptly, intelligently, and constitutionally act to mitigate the dangers that may be posed by a future pandemic or a similar emergency. The pandemic and our collective response to the dangers it posed had a major human, financial, and psychological impact on our state. I know some would simply like to forget the entire episode. I don't blame them, and just move on. It's my opinion this would be the worst thing we could do. Did we make mistakes during the pandemic? Could some things have been better managed? Should some actions not have been taken? And if mistakes were made, will we repeat those mistakes during the next major crisis? My point is we can learn from the past and be better prepared for the future. I come from a strong safety background in the Air Force. I was chief of safety for a large air refueling wing. And I know this isn't the military, it's a different environment. But in the military, under penalty of law, when there was something that didn't go according to Hoyle, something bad, someone hurt, someone killed, property damage, I think exceeding $1 million, we were required within 24 hours to investigate and put out a report. And then we had to follow up sequentially with more reports and brief the entire crew force, Air Force wide. And the reason for that is to prevent that tragedy from happening again. So all I'm asking for here in good faith is just a look-see at what we did and to see if we could do better. I am not pointing fingers at anybody or looking for a pound of flesh or trying to embarrass anybody. And I think if we could do this in an academic atmosphere, it could be done well without embarrassing anybody, and the state would be better off for it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Shippey.
Mr. Chairman, for a motion,
Motion's in order.
I move that we send RS 31877 to print.
Motion by Senator Shippey, second by Senator Adams, that RS 31877 be sent to print. I did not recognize Looksy as a second. So Anyway, discussion on the motion. Senator Dan Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief comment. I think we may need to look at the fiscal note. We typically have a nominal amount to provide to cover any per diem costs. We can work with the bill sponsor on something like that.
Mr. Chair, if I could comment on that.
Senator Foreman.
Senator Den Hartog, that's a good point. I did check into that with budget folks, and they said this could be done using funds already appropriated to the legislature, unless we bring in outside experts, in which case we'd have to come up with the funding.
And I think Senator Dan Hartog's point's well taken. Even if it's funds already there, it's still funds. So I think there probably needs to be something, but so I concur. We do have a motion to send RS 31877 to print. Discussion, further discussion? Seeing those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. No. Senator Harris would like to be recorded as voting no? Thank you. That motion does carry. Last, we're going to consider the minutes of January 10th, 2025. Senator Anton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did review the minutes of January 10th, and I asked that the committee approve. I move the committee approve those.
Second.
Motion by Senator Anton, second by Senator Dan Hartog, that the minutes of January 10th, 2025 be approved. Discussion? Don't see any. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Madam Secretary, you got that done unanimously, so good job. Anything else come before the committee? Have a great weekend. We're adjourned.